100 healers failed the Alpha King's Heir. A rejected Omega healed the Heir in one breath. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's return to our main character. Elena Moore stood at the threshold of Blackwood Citadel as the late afternoon light stretched long across the marble floors. Her palms cooled despite the warmth of the hall, her breathing slow and measured the way she had taught herself after years of being overlooked, because inside these walls even a sigh could feel too loud. The air carried the hush of urgency without panic, a kind of careful silence that settled when everyone knew something precious was slipping away, and Elena knew why she had been summoned without anyone needing to say it aloud. The Alpha King's Heir, Prince Ethan Blackwood, had not awakened since dawn, and the corridors had already seen a procession of the most respected healers from packs within 50 miles, each leaving with the same careful shake of the head and the same polite words that meant nothing had changed. Elena kept her gaze level as she walked, not up at the vaulted ceiling or the banners that celebrated victories long past, but straight ahead, where her path felt narrow and exact, as if the castle itself were measuring her steps. She had learned to move this way early, to take up as little space as possible, to be useful without being noticed, to listen more than she spoke, because an Omega with a rejection mark learned quickly that attention rarely came with kindness. At the doors to the inner chamber, she paused, sensing the weight of the moment before seeing it, the way a room could hold its breath, the way hope could thin to a fragile thread. Inside, King Alaric Blackwood stood near the bed, his posture steady, his face composed in the manner of a man who had learned that showing fear never helped those who depended on him, yet even from several feet away. Elena could feel the gravity of his concern, the quiet pull of a father standing watch. Prince Ethan lay still, his chest rising shallowly, his skin pale against the linens, a young life resting on a balance no one else had been able to steady. Elena did not rush forward, did not announce herself, because she knew that rushing had never been her strength. Instead, she listened, to the rhythm of the room, to the soft ticking of a clock marking seconds that felt heavier than usual, to her own heartbeat reminding her that she was here for a reason she could not fully name. She had been called last, not because she was expected to succeed, but because there were no expectations left, and in that narrow space between doubt and necessity, Elena felt something settle into place, not excitement or fear, but clarity, as if the path ahead had always been waiting for her to notice it. She took one step forward, then another, each measured in calm, carrying with her the quiet certainty that sometimes the smallest breath could change everything. Elena felt the weight of the room settle more fully as she stepped inside, aware that every eye briefly acknowledged her presence before sliding past her again, as if she were a shadow moving along the wall rather than a person with a purpose. She recognized the looks instantly, the polite dismissal, the careful neutrality that followed her everywhere since the night her bond had been rejected and her name quietly removed from conversations that mattered. A senior healer adjusted his sleeves and cleared his throat, not unkindly, simply efficiently, the way one did when an obligation needed to be completed before moving on. Someone murmured that there was no harm in allowing her to stand nearby, since nothing else had worked, and Elena accepted that sentence without flinching, because she had learned that acceptance did not always come with belief. She took her place near the foot of the bed, hands folded loosely, her posture calm, her presence unobtrusive, while the others resumed their quiet exchange of measured tones and careful conclusions. The words washed over her, pulse irregular, response unremarkable, rest required, as though Prince Ethan were a problem to be managed rather than a young life balanced on a fragile edge. Elena looked at the boy then, really looked, noticing details others had missed in their focus on charts and rituals, the faint tension around his brow, the way his breathing paused before each shallow rise, the subtle pattern of strain that spoke of something deeper than illness. She felt a familiar ache in her chest, not fear, but recognition, The same instinct that had guided her hands to frightened animals and restless children long before anyone had taught her what healing was supposed to look like. She remembered the pack hall where she had once waited for her name to be called, the long silence that followed, the gentle redirection afterward, as if rejection were a simple administrative error rather than a fracture that reshaped a life. That memory did not weaken her now. Instead, it grounded her, reminding her how to stand when expectations were gone. King Alaric turned slightly then, his gaze passing over the gathered healers before resting on Elena, not with command or dismissal, but with quiet assessment, the look of a man who had exhausted every formal option and was now paying attention to what remained. No one introduced her, no announcement was made, and Elena was grateful for that, because she did not need a title to do what she had come to do. She felt the room shift almost imperceptibly, not toward hope, but toward pause, as if the steady forward march of failure had hesitated for the first time all day. Elena stepped closer to the bed, her movements slow enough to avoid startling anyone, and she rested her hand lightly on the wooden frame, grounding herself before acting, the way she always did. She did not pray aloud or close her eyes, did not summon anything beyond her own steady breath, because she had learned that healing began with listening, not asking. The silence deepened, and in that stillness Elena felt a quiet certainty take hold, not confidence born of praise, but the calm that came from knowing exactly where she was meant to stand. Whatever the others expected from her, she let it fall away, focusing instead on the small, precise task before her, because sometimes the world changed not through grand effort, but through one person finally being allowed to try. The chamber did not grow louder after Elena moved closer, but it did grow heavier, as though every unspoken doubt had settled into the air at once. A healer near. The window shifted his weight and spoke in a low voice, careful to sound respectful, while making his point clear, reminding the room that every known method had already been attempted, that rare herbs had been measured to the grain, that chants had been spoken at precise intervals, that nothing had altered the steady decline they were watching. Another nodded, adding that Prince Ethan's condition was stable only in the most technical sense, a phrase that sounded hopeful until one understood how little it truly promised. Elena listened without interrupting, because she knew this pattern well, the slow circling of expertise around a problem that refused to be solved, the way certainty became armor when fear crept too close. She noticed how each healer stood slightly farther back than the last, as if distance itself were a kind of protection, and she wondered when trying had begun to feel like risking too much. King Alaric remained near his son, one hand resting on the carved headboard, his eyes never leaving Prince Ethan's face, absorbing every word without responding, the kind of silence that carried authority without effort. When one healer finally addressed Elena directly, his tone was not sharp, merely factual, explaining that she was welcome to observe, that learning was always valuable, but that the situation required methods proven over generations, not instincts that could not be measured or repeated. Elena met his gaze calmly, accepting the words for what they were, a boundary drawn without cruelty, and she gave a small nod to show she had heard him. Inside, she felt no urge to defend herself, because she had long since learned that explanation rarely changed perception, and because her focus was already narrowing toward the steady rhythm she sensed beneath the quiet tension of the room. Another healer stepped forward briefly, adjusted a monitor, checked a reading, then stepped back again, shaking her head with careful restraint, her disappointment softened by professionalism. It was not despair that filled the space, but resignation, the kind that came after hope had been methodically exhausted. Elena could feel it pressing against her chest, not as weight, but as absence, and she recognized it as the same feeling she had known when doors closed gently but firmly in her past. She glanced once more at Prince Ethan, noting the faint tremor in his breathing, the way his fingers curled slightly, as if responding to something no one else could sense, and a quiet understanding settled over her. Healing, she knew, did not always announce itself with signs others expected, and sometimes it waited patiently for the one person who was willing to listen differently. King Alaric finally spoke then, his voice calm, steady, carrying easily through the room without the need for volume, thanking the healers for their efforts, acknowledging their skill, and granting them permission to step back for a moment. The words were not dismissal, but pause, and the effect was immediate, a subtle shift as people moved aside, creating a small, unspoken space around the bed. Elena felt the change like a door opening just enough to step through, not because anyone believed in her, but because there was nothing left to lose. She took a slow breath, feeling the room watch her now with a different kind of attention, one edged with doubt rather than expectation, and she understood that this was the moment when outcomes were decided quietly, without ceremony. The 100 attempts before her had not failed because they lacked effort or knowledge, but because they had all searched for the same answer. And Elena knew, with a clarity that surprised even her, that she was about to try something no one else had considered, not because it was forbidden or powerful, but because it was simple. Elena felt the shift in attention like a spotlight she had never asked for, the kind that did not warm but exposed, and she understood immediately that the space given to her was not an invitation so much as a test. A healer near the far wall exhaled softly, not in anger but in weary disbelief, and murmured that this was highly irregular, that allowing an unverified Omega to approach the Heir without formal protocol risked confusion, if nothing else. Another added, carefully choosing words, that intention did not replace training, and that compassion, while admirable, could not substitute for methods refined across centuries. Their voices were not raised, yet each sentence landed with quiet precision, shaping the unspoken judgment in the room. Elena kept her expression steady, though she felt the familiar tightening in her chest, the echo of rooms where she had once stood exactly like this, present but untrusted, visible but unvalued. She had learned long ago that rejection did not always arrive as cruelty. Sometimes it came dressed as concern, as order, as reason. King Alaric did not turn to silence them, nor did he encourage their doubts, and in that restraint Elena sensed the weight of his position, balancing hope against responsibility, trust against consequence. Someone finally spoke more plainly, noting that if this were any other circumstance, the idea would not even be discussed, and that desperation should not lower standards that protected the realm. The words were meant for the king, but their impact settled squarely on Elena, pressing against her history, reminding her that no matter how calm she stood, she was still seen through the lens of what she lacked. She nodded once, acknowledging the concern without retreating, because retreat had never brought her closer to what mattered. Her gaze returned to Prince Ethan, whose breathing remained uneven, each pause stretching just long enough to draw the eye, and Elena felt the quiet urgency sharpen within her. She did not argue, did not list experiences that had never earned her titles, did not ask for belief, because she knew belief could not be demanded. Instead, she spoke simply, her voice low but clear, explaining that she did not intend to perform a ritual or alter any readings, that she would not interfere with what had already been done, and that she only asked for a moment to try something that required no tools, no preparation, and no disruption. The simplicity of the request drew a brief, skeptical silence, the kind that followed statements too modest to refute easily. A healer frowned, pointing out that moments had already been spent generously, that time itself was now a factor, and that allowing further attempts risked false hope. Elena accepted the rebuke with a small nod, because she understood the fear behind it, the fear of believing too late or in the wrong thing. She glanced at King Alaric then, not pleading, not demanding, but meeting his eyes with quiet resolve, offering nothing more than her presence and her readiness. The room seemed to wait on his response, the subtle tension tightening like a held breath. He did not speak immediately, and in that pause Elena felt the weight of her status more clearly than ever, the reality that if this failed, it would not be seen as another attempt, but as proof that she should never have been allowed to try. The thought did not frighten her as much as she might have expected. Instead, it clarified her focus, stripping away every lingering doubt until only the task remained. She placed her hand gently on the edge of the bed, not touching Prince Ethan yet, grounding herself once more, and in that small, deliberate motion, she chose to stand fully in the moment, regardless of how the outcome would be judged. Whatever happened next, Elena knew she would not look back on this instant and wish she had stayed silent, because sometimes dignity was not found in being believed, but in acting with purpose even when belief was absent. Elena waited for the smallest signal before moving, not a spoken command, but the subtle release in the room that told her no one would stop her now, and she stepped closer to Prince Ethan with a calm that surprised even herself. She did not rush, because urgency could not be forced, and she knew that whatever she was about to do required steadiness more than speed. Standing beside the bed, she observed him once more, noting the shallow rise of his chest, the faint tremor at the corner of his mouth, the quiet struggle happening beneath stillness, and she felt a deep, instinctive pull toward balance, as if something within her recognized something unfinished within him. She placed one hand gently over his sternum, light enough to avoid pressure, grounding enough to feel the subtle warmth beneath his skin, and with her other hand she rested against the mattress, anchoring herself to the present moment. The room seemed to narrow then, sounds softening, the distant ticking of the clock fading into the background as Elena focused on the simple, essential rhythm of breathing. She did not call on any power by name, did not search for permission, because what she intended was not an act of dominance or display, but an offering of calm, something she had learned to give long before she understood its value. Elena drew in a slow breath through her nose, filling her lungs fully, deliberately, allowing the air to settle before releasing it just as slowly, and as she did, she imagined that steadiness passing through her hand, not as force, but as reassurance. She repeated the motion, once, then again, matching the pace she wished Prince Ethan's body would remember, trusting that sometimes the simplest cues were the most powerful. The healers watched in silence, unsure whether to look away out of courtesy or closer out of disbelief, because nothing visible was happening, no light, no chant, no dramatic shift to justify attention. Elena felt no strain, no surge, only a quiet connection, as if she were reminding a tired body how to rest properly. On the third breath, she leaned slightly closer, not invading space, but aligning herself more fully with the rhythm she was offering, and she felt a subtle change beneath her palm, so slight it could have been dismissed if she had not been paying attention. Prince Ethan's breathing paused, then resumed, deeper this time, the rise of his chest fractionally more pronounced, the tension around his brow easing just enough to notice. Elena did not react outwardly, did not break focus, because she knew how easily fragile progress could be disrupted by expectation. She continued, steady and patient, her breath slow and deliberate, allowing the silence to hold without interruption. A soft sound escaped Prince Ethan then, not a word, not a cry, but a quiet exhale that carried relief more than effort, and Elena felt a warmth spread beneath her hand, gentle and consistent, like a system finding its balance again. The change was not dramatic, not sudden enough to satisfy those waiting for proof, but it was real, and Elena trusted it completely. She remained where she was, continuing the rhythm for several more moments, until she sensed that whatever had been faltering was now sustaining itself, no longer reliant on her guidance. Only then did she slowly ease her hand back, careful not to disrupt the calm she had helped restore, and she stepped away from the bed with the same quiet intention she had brought to it. The room remained silent, suspended between disbelief and dawning awareness, as Prince Ethan's breathing settled into a steadier pattern, unmistakably different from before. Elena said nothing, because she understood that this moment did not belong to explanation or acknowledgement, but to observation, and she waited, allowing the truth of what had happened to speak for itself. The change did not announce itself with sound or spectacle, but it became impossible to ignore once it settled into the room, like a shift in pressure that everyone felt before anyone understood. One of the healers closest to the bed leaned forward. Instinctively, eyes narrowing as she watched Prince Ethan's chest rise and fall with a steadiness that had not been there moments before, and she checked the monitor again, then once more, as if the numbers might contradict what her senses were already confirming. A quiet murmur passed through the group, restrained but unmistakable, the tone changing from careful resignation to cautious alertness. Elena stood back, hands relaxed at her sides, her breathing returning to its natural rhythm, because her role in the moment had already ended, and she knew better than to linger where she was no longer needed. King Alaric noticed first, not because he was watching the instruments, but because he was watching his son, the way only a parent could, recognizing the subtle return of ease in a body he knew better than any chart. He stepped closer, placing his hand gently over Prince Ethan's, feeling warmth and a faint, responsive pressure where there had been only stillness before, and for the first time that day, his shoulders eased. The room seemed to release a breath it had been holding, the silence reshaping itself into something lighter, more tentative, as if hope were testing its footing before stepping fully into view. A healer cleared his throat and spoke carefully, confirming that the air's breathing had stabilized, that the irregular pauses had diminished, that whatever imbalance they had been monitoring was correcting itself rather than worsening. Another added that the change could not be attributed to any intervention they had performed, her tone thoughtful rather than defensive, as though she were revising long-held assumptions in real time. Elena remained quiet, not out of fear, but out of respect for the process unfolding, understanding that this was not her recognition to claim. Prince Ethan shifted slightly then, his fingers curling more fully, his expression smoothing into something closer to rest than struggle, and the effect was immediate, a ripple of disbelief moving through the room. Someone whispered that it had been hours since he had shown any response at all, and another shook his head slowly, eyes fixed on Elena with a look that held more questions than judgment. She met the gaze briefly, offering no explanation, because she had none that would satisfy their need for structure, and because what she had done did not fit neatly into the language of procedures. King Alaric turned toward her. Then, not abruptly, but with deliberate attention, his expression unreadable as he studied her as carefully as he had studied the situation all day. The room followed his focus, and suddenly Elena felt the full weight of collective awareness settle on her, not dismissive this time, but searching. She did not shrink from it, nor did she step forward to receive it, choosing instead to stand exactly where she was, grounded and calm. The king spoke quietly, asking one of the healers to confirm again that the improvement was real and sustained, and when the answer came back measured but affirmative, something unspoken passed behind his eyes. He looked once more at his son, then back at Elena, and inclined his head slightly, not as a gesture of authority, but of acknowledgement. No proclamation followed, no immediate declaration of meaning, because King Alaric understood that moments like this required care, not haste. Elena felt a subtle warmth spread through her chest, not pride, but relief, knowing that Prince Ethan was no longer slipping away, knowing that whatever doubt had surrounded her moments earlier had been interrupted by something undeniable. The healers resumed their work with renewed focus, adjusting their approach to support the new stability rather than compensate for decline, and the room shifted fully now, the earlier heaviness replaced by a fragile, growing certainty. Elena watched quietly as life reasserted itself in small, steady ways, understanding that the miracle, if it could be called that, was not loud, but persistent, and that its significance was only just beginning to be understood. King Alaric remained beside the bed longer than protocol required, longer than the healers expected, his attention fixed on the subtle signs of returning strength that only a father would notice, the steadier color in Prince Ethan's skin, the way his breathing no longer fought for balance, but accepted it. Around him, the chamber adjusted to this new reality, voices kept low, movements careful, as though everyone sensed they were standing at the edge of something that demanded respect rather than celebration. Elena felt the shift again, not as pressure this time, but as focus, the collective awareness turning toward her with a different quality, no longer dismissive or doubtful, but searching, as if the room itself were trying to understand how its certainty had been undone. King Alaric finally straightened, his posture unchanged in authority but softened in presence, and he looked at Elena fully now, not as an Omega brought in out of desperation, but as the person whose actions had altered the course of the day. His gaze was steady, assessing without judgment, and Elena met it without lowering her eyes, her calm unchanged, because she had nothing to defend and nothing to claim. He asked her quietly to explain what she had done, not in the tone of interrogation, but of genuine inquiry, and the room leaned in slightly, waiting for an answer that might restore familiar order. Elena considered her response carefully, knowing that words could easily diminish what had occurred if shaped to fit expectations, and she spoke simply, explaining that she had not used a technique or a spell, that she had only offered steadiness where there had been strain, calm where there had been imbalance, and that sometimes the body responded when it was reminded how. The simplicity of her explanation unsettled some of the healers more than a complex answer would have, because it left little room for hierarchy or ownership. One healer frowned thoughtfully, acknowledging that while such an approach was not formally recognized, the outcome could not be ignored, and another admitted that the readings supported a genuine improvement rather than a temporary fluctuation. King Alaric listened without interruption, absorbing each perspective, his attention never leaving Elena for long, as though he were weighing not only her words, but the consistency between her presence and the results she had achieved. He moved then, slowly and deliberately, stepping away from the bed and toward her, the sound of his footsteps measured against the stone floor, and the room fell fully silent. Elena felt no fear as he approached, only awareness, understanding that whatever he said next would carry weight far beyond this chamber. He stopped a few feet from her, close enough that she could see the fine lines of strain that had etched themselves into his expression over the past hours, and he inclined his head, not deeply, but clearly, a gesture that did not diminish his authority, but acknowledged hers. The effect was immediate and profound, a visible ripple through the gathered healers, because they understood what such a gesture meant from a king who did nothing lightly. He thanked her, not for trying, but for succeeding, his words precise, deliberate, and spoken so that there could be no misunderstanding. He stated plainly that whatever she had offered his son had restored balance where none of their methods had, and that such a contribution would not be dismissed or forgotten. Elena felt a quiet warmth at his words, not pride, but recognition, the kind that settled gently rather than striking all at once. She responded with equal composure, expressing relief for Prince Ethan's recovery without embellishment, because the moment did not belong to her alone. King Alaric turned then to the others, instructing them to continue their care with renewed purpose, to observe closely, to learn rather than resist what had occurred, and his tone made it clear that this was not a suggestion. As the room resumed its careful movement, Elena understood that something fundamental had shifted, not only in how she was seen, but in how possibility itself had been redefined within these walls. She remained where she was, steady and present, as the significance of the moment continued to unfold, knowing that recognition from a king was not given lightly, and that its consequences would reach far beyond this quiet chamber. The chamber settled into a quieter rhythm as the immediate urgency passed, but the sense of significance only deepened, as though everyone present understood they were witnessing the beginning of something that could not be undone. Prince Ethan slept more naturally now, his breathing even, his features relaxed in a way that suggested genuine rest rather than enforced stillness, and the healers moved with renewed purpose, careful not to disturb the balance that had been restored. King Alaric remained attentive, but his focus had expanded beyond the bed, his thoughts clearly turning toward what this moment meant for the kingdom as much as for his family. He gestured subtly for Elena to follow him a few steps away, not removing her from the room, but creating just enough distance for a conversation that required clarity rather than spectacle. Elena complied without hesitation, her posture composed, her awareness steady, sensing that what came next would define more than her place in the chamber. The king spoke quietly, asking about her background, her training, the path that had led her to develop such an intuitive understanding of balance, and Elena answered honestly, describing a life shaped by listening more than speaking, by observing patterns others overlooked, by learning to steady herself when no one else offered support. She did not frame her experiences as hardship, nor did she soften them, presenting them simply as facts that had shaped her awareness. King Alaric listened with the same focus he brought to matters of state, absorbing each detail, and as she spoke, he began to see a larger pattern emerge, one that aligned with ancient teachings rarely discussed outside of formal study. He recalled texts that spoke of guardians not chosen by rank or strength, but by resonance, individuals whose presence alone could restore harmony to fractured systems, whose gift manifested not through force, but through alignment. The realization settled slowly, unmistakably, and with it came a shift in his expression, a recognition that carried both gravity and resolve. He told Elena that what she had demonstrated was not merely uncommon, but deeply significant, that her ability aligned with a role described in the oldest records of the realm, one entrusted with safeguarding the continuity of leadership itself. The words landed softly but firmly, and Elena felt their weight not as pressure, but as clarity, as though something she had sensed all along was finally being named. She did not react with disbelief or alarm, because the explanation resonated with her own quiet understanding of her purpose, the sense she had always carried that her gift existed to serve something larger than individual recognition. King Alaric continued, explaining that such guardians were bound not by hierarchy, but by responsibility, their loyalty directed toward balance and preservation rather than power, and that their presence near the royal line was considered both a blessing and a safeguard. He made it clear that this was not a burden he placed lightly, nor an honor to be assigned casually, but a truth he could no longer ignore given what she had accomplished. Elena listened carefully, appreciating the care with which he framed the revelation, and when she responded, her voice remained calm, expressing neither eagerness nor reluctance, only readiness to act in alignment with what was needed. The king regarded her thoughtfully, recognizing that her composure in the face of such knowledge was itself confirmation of her suitability. He informed her that from this moment forward, her status within the realm would change, not elevating her above others, but placing her beyond the limitations that had previously defined her, ensuring she would have access, protection, and authority to act when balance required it. The chamber, though not privy to every word, seemed to sense the shift, the atmosphere charged with quiet anticipation as the implications settled in. Elena felt a steady resolve anchor within her, not as ambition, but as acceptance, understanding that destiny did not always arrive with fanfare, but often revealed itself through responsibility recognized and embraced. As she returned her attention to Prince Ethan, watching the steady rise and fall of his chest, she understood that her role had always been connected to moments like this, where calm restored what force could not, and she stood ready to fulfill it without hesitation. The night deepened beyond the chamber walls, but inside, a quiet brightness took hold, the kind that did not glare or demand attention, only endured. Prince Ethan stirred more noticeably now, his breathing steady, his pulse strong beneath careful observation, and when his eyes finally fluttered open, the room froze in reverent stillness. He did not speak at first, only looked around with a faint confusion that quickly softened when his gaze found his father, recognition blooming with gentle certainty. King Alaric stepped forward at once, placing a reassuring hand over his son's, his composure steady even as relief passed through him in a visible wave, and he spoke softly, telling him to rest, that he was safe, that he had done well simply by returning. The healers watched closely, confirming what their instruments already showed, that the heir was no longer in danger, that the balance restored was holding firm, and the confirmation spread through the chamber like a held breath finally released. Elena observed quietly from where she stood, her focus returning to the steady rhythms she had helped restore, content to let the moment belong to the family reunited before her. King Alaric turned then, his expression resolved, and addressed the gathered healers and attendants with clarity and authority, acknowledging their efforts while making clear that what had occurred would not be minimized or misunderstood. He stated plainly that Elena Moore had acted not as a last resort, but as a vital presence whose contribution had changed the outcome when all else had failed, and that from this moment forward, her standing within the realm was to be recognized accordingly. The words carried weight, reshaping perceptions instantly, and Elena felt the shift not as elevation above others, but as the removal of a burden she had carried quietly for years. The king continued, declaring that no one under his rule would dismiss her as rejected or insignificant again, that her gift served the realm itself, and that she would be afforded the respect and protection necessary to fulfill her role without obstruction. There was no applause, no outward display, only solemn acceptance, because everyone present understood the permanence of such a declaration. Elena met the king's gaze, offering a calm nod of acknowledgement, gratitude expressed not through emotion, but through readiness, because she knew this was not an ending, but a beginning defined by responsibility. Prince Ethan shifted again, stronger this time, and managed a faint smile in her direction, a quiet, unspoken thanks that carried more sincerity than any formal praise could, and Elena returned it with a gentle inclination of her head, content to know that he would recover fully. As the chamber gradually resumed its rhythm, plans forming quietly, Elena felt a sense of alignment settle within her, the feeling of finally standing where she belonged, not elevated by recognition, but anchored by purpose. King Alaric remained beside his son, watchful and calm, and in that image Elena saw the truth of what had been restored, not only a life, but a future steadied against uncertainty. The light within the chamber seemed to soften as the moment concluded, not dimming, but settling into something enduring, and Elena understood that her journey would continue beyond these walls, shaped by the same quiet strength that had guided her here. She did not look back as she prepared to step into what came next, because she knew that the path forward was no longer defined by what she lacked, but by what she carried, a gift recognized at last, not through force or spectacle, but through the simple act of restoring balance when it mattered most.